Greetings all, I'm Bill Vencil. This is Chords of Orion and it's all about ambient guitar here. On today's video, we're going to see how the Line 6 HX Stomp can be used to create really cool Frippertronics effects. If you're not familiar with this technique, it was popularized, not invented by, but popularized by Robert Fripp way back in the day, and it involves using long delay times to create undulating, ever-changing layers and loops of sound. It's a pretty cool technique. Any old who, I've got two different patches set up here on my HX Stomp. I'm going to go ahead and play an example of patch number 1, then I'll explain it. Then I'll play an example of patch number 2, and then I'll explain that. Let's go ahead and get to work with number 1. Alright guys, that was example number 1. Kind of cool, wasn't it? I like that little kind of short delay following the longer delay loop as I use the E-bow to create the layers of lines. Alright, let's look at this patch and see what I did. First up is the dynamic block, and I'm using the deluxe compressor as a compressor, and you can kind of see the settings there. It's a high ratio, 20:1, -31 threshold. The mix, however, is 74%. So even though it's pretty squished, it is allowing some of the uncompressed signal to come through. So it's not so squished. You still get some of the dynamics and attack. Now, I don't have much attack because I was using the E-bow, but oh well. Anyhow, if you're gonna kind of follow along, I would say use this compressor or any of the other compressors that you prefer, and get a squished sound, but give it not so squished that it doesn't have any life. So play around with that. Next up is the amp and cabinet block, and I'm using the US double vibe amp model, and as you can see, I've got a little bit of drive going. It's a little bit more than halfway. So if I were going to play this without the E-bow, you would hear just a little bit of crunch going on with the amp. Bass kind of midland, mids are pulled down a little bit, treble a little bit more than midland, a little bit of presence. You can kind of see what's going on there. And if you're familiar with the HX Stomp, you know we get a lot of options with sag, hum, ripple, bias, and bias X, right? To really kind of tune in what you want. All right, speaker cabinet. I love using a Fender amp model with a Marshall speaker cabinet. I love that sound. So I selected the 4x12 Greenback 25 cabinet, and I'm using the 57 dynamic mic. And you can see the settings here, a little bit of low cut, a little bit high cut, no early reflections, and I like the way it sounds. All right, volume pedal is up next. I've got that mapped to expression jack number 1, and I've got my expression pedal plugged into the HX Stomp. You'll note that I've got a linear curve set on the volume pedal. So as I press down on the volume pedal, then the sweep really brings in the volume very quickly, which I tend to like for a lot of different volume pedal uses. But you go with whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you like. So if you like logarithmic better, go for it. It's all about taste, right? Next up is the heart of the Frippertronics loop, and that is the one-switch looper block. And as you can see, I've got it set up to play back the loops that are created at about negative 4.5 dB starting. So I play the original line, it records it, and then plays it back starting at negative 4.5 dB lower, right? And then the overdub is set to less than 0 dB. If I had it set to 0 dB, it would just loop forever, right? As long as I left it playing. But when you take that overdub level and bring it down, that causes the loop to fade out over time. And at negative 7.1 dB, that means that each time the loop plays over, comes around to the loop again, it's going to play basically 7 dB lower than the time before. So after 4 loops, you're negative 28 dB. After, 5 loops, you're at negative 35, right? So you're really going to get maybe 6 or 7 loops before it gets so quiet, it's really, really hard to hear. So that's kind of the heart, again, of Frippertronics. It's decaying loops. And one of the nice things about using this one-switch looper is that you get to choose, right before you start playing, you get to choose the loop length. So what I do is put the loop into the looper into record mode when it's initialized initially, and then maybe count to 6 or 7 or 8, however many seconds I want. Hit it again to close off the loop. That puts it into play. And then I hit the switch again to put it into overdub mode and just leave it on overdub for the entire time I'm playing. All right, next up is another delay. For this patch, I decided I wanted a short delay after the main loop to kind of add a little depth to it, not quite a slap. And I'm using the ping pong, so I get right and left, kind of that stereo effect. 366 milliseconds, not very much feedback. And you can kind of see the settings there. So I would, if you want to create a patch like this, I would recommend the ping pong or another similar delay type in the HX Stomp and set it down to a fairly low delay time. Next up is the reverb block, and that is the Glitz reverb. You can see that I've got the delay or decay time set to about 6.9 seconds with just a little bit of pre-delay and no low cut, very little high cut, and you can see the mix is pretty low. So I kind of like the way that works. We've got some modulation options in this delay, so I've got rate and depth kind of pulled up so you can kind of hear modulation going on as I'm playing. All right, that is patch number 1 for example number 1. Let's go ahead and listen to example number 2. right, let's go ahead and get into the patch for this one. First up, interestingly enough, is a volume pedal. Again, I've got my expression pedal plugged into the HX Stomp, and that's what is acting as a volume pedal. This time, however, unlike the first example, I've got this volume pedal set to logarithmic, which means that the volume swell is slower, and the volume increase gets more rapid towards the end of the sweep, which gives one more of a trumpet swell effect, in particular with a distorted tone like I have going on when the volume pedal is before any of the distortion or amp effects. All right, let's go ahead and check out distortion since we're talking about that. I'm using the Super OD. You know where that comes from, don't you? Just a little bit of drive, tone is fairly low, level is kind of middling. All right, pretty simple. Let's see what the amp and cabinet is. It's the German Mahadeva, and as you can see, the drive is pretty cranked, 6.6. It's not all the way up, but it's pretty cranked. And so what this means is there's a good bit of distortion coming off the amp model itself. And so the distortion pedal I'm using that to drive the amp harder to create more distortion from the amplifier itself. All right, in this case, I've got a 1x12 lead 80 cabinet set. You can see the settings there. I've got a condenser mic model going on, and virtually, no low cut, no high cut. So it's the full range of capture from the microphone model. Next up is EQ. I wanted to tweak the tone a little bit, so I grabbed a 10-band graphic EQ, and I won't go through all the bands, but you can kind of see what I'm doing there. If you are going to create a similar patch, you would just grab this thing, and then you've got a different guitar from me, and you may use a different amp model, so you'll want to adjust these levels to taste for your particular setup. All right, let's get into delays, the fun stuff. Delay number 1 is the simple delay, and I've got it pulled out to the full 8 seconds that simple delay can do in mono. And the reason for this is that gives me an 8-second Frippertronics loop, right? And I've got the feedback set to 35%, and in this instance, the loops fade out pretty quickly. If you're interested in the loops hanging out longer, you can just simply bring the feedback up to whatever level, sounds good to you. That's pretty much it. It's a very simple delay, and it works really well for 8-second or shorter Frippertronics loops. All right, I've got another delay 2, which is the Mod Chorus Echo. I've got that set to about a 1-second delay, and I'm using this for kind of layers. So if you heard me playing, you probably noticed that when I played, there was a delay or an echo sound pretty quickly after I played a note, and then the longer Frippertronics loop would follow. That quicker delay obviously is coming from the Mod Chorus Echo, and again, that's the 1-second loop. If you wanted to make it a little more complex, you could actually increase this out to, maybe 6 seconds or something like that, and you would still have a longish loop that would be Frippertronics kind of style, and then you could actually have 2 different Frippertronics loops going at the same time. That would be really interesting. All right, feedback, you see where that is. Got a little low cut and high cut going on, and a little bit of modulation there. All right, let's talk about delay number 3. That's right, I've got 3 delays on this patch. This is the transistor tape delay, and it also is set to approximately 1 second. It's a little bit different, so between the Mod Chorus Echo and the transistor tape, you kind of get galloping, kind of, undulating layers in that shorter delay time, whatever undulating means. Anyhow, what I'd like to call out here in particular is the wow and flutter control. It is a tape style delay, so you can pull up that wow and flutter to get that kind of warbly tape delay kind of thing going. Everything else is pretty standard. I'll let you take a look at that. Again, you adjust it to the way you like it. Finally, we have a reverb. Yeah, another reverb going. This is the Ganymede reverb. You can see decay time is about 6.5 seconds. No pre-delay, tone in the middle. And I've got a fair amount of modulation going on with the Ganymede to kind of, again, give it some space and depth to the reverb tone itself. So yeah, the HX Stomp Frippertronics, pretty cool. I've got a playlist here of other Frippertronics thingies I've done here on the channel. Hope you'll check it out, and I'll see all of you on the next video.